Hello, today I will tell you the story of the 1952 Washington UFO incidents. UFO frenzy begins. Everything started in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 flying saucer-like things flying in a chain-like pattern. Like geese, at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. Within a few weeks, sightings of flying saucers were reported in 40 states across the United States. In 1948, Air Force General Nathan Twining launched Project Sign, the first official military intelligence program to gather information on UFO sightings. In the interest of national security, researchers largely dismissed the majority of sightings as hoaxes or misidentifications of known aircraft or natural phenomena. However, a few cases remained unexplained. By 1952, the UFO Research Unit was given the name Project Blue Book and was led by Captain Edward Ruppelt at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Ruppelt and his team would likely have continued investigating dozens of sightings every month if it weren't for an April 1952 Life magazine article. Above Marilyn Monroe's stunning cover photo was an equally eye-catching headline, "There's a case for interplanetary saucers." The article, written in collaboration with Ruppelt, explained the Air Force's national security interest in UFOs and provided compelling evidence that the unidentifiable objects were of extraterrestrial origin, with colorful descriptions of 10 unexplained UFO cases. A rocket scientist working on secret projects for the United States told Life, "I'm completely convinced that these have an extraterrestrial basis." According to the Washington Post, the number of reported UFO sightings to the Air Force increased from 23 in March to 148 in June. By July, the conditions for a UFO frenzy had been created: widespread Cold War anxiety, mainstream media coverage of unexplained UFO incidents. All that was needed was a spark. Mysterious radar signals above the White House. On July 19, 1952, Air Traffic Controller Edward Nugent at Washington National Airport detected 7 slow-moving objects on his radar screen, which were far away from any known civilian or military flight paths. He called his supervisor and joked about a flying saucer fleet. At the same time, 2 other air traffic controllers at National saw a strange, bright light hovering in the distance, which suddenly sped away at an incredible speed. Radar operators at Andrews Air Force Base nearby were also picking up the same unidentified signals, first slow and clustered, then moving away at speeds exceeding 7,000 miles per hour. A controller looking out from his tower described seeing a glowing orange ball following its tail. A commercial pilot flying over Virginia and Washington, D.C. reported seeing 6 bright lights, like tailless shooting stars. When radar operators at National saw the objects pass by the White House and Capitol building, the UFO joke stopped. 2 F-94 interceptor jets were scrambled, but every time they got close to the locations on the radar screens, the mysterious blips disappeared. By dawn on July 20th, the objects were gone. No one bothered to tell the head researcher of the Air Force's Project Blue Book, Ruppelt, about the incident. He only found out a few days later when he flew to Washington, D.C. and read news reports. Ruppelt tried to talk to radar operators and air traffic controllers at National and Andrews, but was even denied a government-provided car or taxi fare. Disappointed, Ruppelt went back to Ohio empty-handed. The following Saturday, the UFOs were back over the Capitol. Ruppelt learned about it again through a reporter's phone call and immediately called 2 colleagues from the Air Force to check the situation at National. The same radar blips had returned, and radar operators were wondering if the blips, which numbered up to a dozen, were caused by a temperature inversion, a common occurrence in the hot and humid summer months in the capital. A temperature inversion occurs when a layer of warm air forms in the lower atmosphere, trapping cooler air below it. Radar signals can bounce off this layer at shallow angles and inadvertently show objects near the ground as if they were in the sky. However, Ruppelt's Air Force colleagues were convinced that the objects on the radar screens were not mirages, but real aircraft. As a precaution, 2 more F-94 jets were assigned to track the unidentified targets that appeared on both National and Andrews radar screens. A high-speed cat-and-mouse game began, with the jets racing towards the target indicated by the radar, but the signals disappearing. Finally, one of the jet pilots saw a bright light in the distance and began to chase it. The pilot later told journalists, "I saw several bright lights. I was at maximum speed, but even then, I had no chance of overtaking them. I stopped following them because I saw I couldn't catch up." Prevent mass panic with a controversial theory. The next day, American newspapers were screaming headlines like "Flying saucers over the Capitol" and "Jets chase ghostly objects in D.C. skies." The panic that the sightings caused in the public was so great that President Harry Truman asked his aides to get some answers. When they called Ruppelt, he said that it could have been caused by a temperature inversion. But more research was needed to fully explain both the radar readings and the accounts of reliable witnesses. However, before such an in-depth investigation could be conducted, the Air Force held a press conference, which was the longest one held since World War II. The Air Force leadership had decided that the best response to the sightings, without consulting Ruppelt or the Blue Book Project team, was to offer an easy-to-believe explanation to the press and the public. General John Samford, evading specific questions about what pilots and radar operators saw in the skies over the Capitol building, repeatedly returned to the theory of temperature inversion. He ignored Ruppelt's subsequent conclusion to the contrary.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. Our basic difficulty in dealing with these is that there is no measurement of them that makes it possible for us to put them in any pattern that would be profitable for a deliberate, custom sort of analysis to take the next step. We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion with respect to this remaining percentage, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate with to any conceivable threat to the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
Alejandro Rojas, the editor of the UFO news site Open Minds, says researchers had ruled out inversion. They had investigated it. Radar operators said, "We get inversions. We know what they look like. This is not an inversion. This is not the same thing at all." Despite Ruppelt's disappointment, the Air Force press conference went exactly as planned. The newspapers reported the temperature inversion story, and the public largely seemed to accept it. In his 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, Ruppelt reported that after the press conference, UFO sightings dropped from 50 a day to 10. However, skeptics were not satisfied with the government's response. Many accused the Air Force and Blue Book Project researchers of deceptive behavior and hiding information. Until the Project Blue Book documents were released to the public in 1985. UFO detectives could only see that the government was covering up UFO sightings in the nation's capital as a conspiracy of ignorance. Nick Pope, a UFO journalist who managed the UFO research unit of the British Ministry of Defense, says, the UFO scandal in Washington perfectly illustrates the cover-up issue. It's not a case of officials conspiring to keep a terrible truth about UFOs from the public, but rather a situation where the government did its best to prevent people from realizing they didn't have all the answers. If you think the video is useful content, you can like and subscribe. Stay tuned.